Hi everybody, welcome back to my page and thank you ever so much for tuning in. I am here today with the amazing Jessica Josie, who is otherwise known as the Nutrition RVN. She is absolutely brilliant about all things pet food. You must go and follow her pages on Instagram and on Twitter and also her blog. Do you have a Facebook page?
I don't yet. No, not at the moment.
So, Instagram and Twitter, Nutrition RVN, and also her blog, which is nutritionrvn.com. She writes fabulously and discusses all the time about pet food. So I've got her on this evening, and what we're going to discuss is pet food ingredients lists, because that is the way that most people understandably judge a pet food, and also less understandably, a lot of pet food rating websites use pet food ingredients as a way to judge pet foods. But actually, it's not always, in fact, it isn't the best way to judge a pet food. And we are going to discuss why that is and how you can judge a pet food and how you can understand that ingredient list. So, Jess, thank you so much for joining me. One more thing that I want to know is tell me about you. What are your qualifications in nutrition? And why do you do what you do? Just really briefly fill us in.
Yeah, look, super briefly, pre becoming a registered vet nurse, I actually went to university and I studied Bachelor of Animal and Veterinary Bioscience. So in that, I actually majored in zoology, animal health, and animal nutrition. Basically, all of the animal nutrition qualifications that I have were kind of built into that university degree. And we're based on basically building case studies on, here's a problem, here's an animal health issue, and how you're going to solve it with nutrition. And then following on from that, I basically did my veterinary nursing degree. I became a registered vet nurse, and in Australia, we also have a further qualification, which is an accredited vet nurse. So I basically went that little bit further and have done a little bit more continuing education.
Fabulous. Thank you. Yeah. So you know what you're talking about. And I think that's really, really important, because on the internet, a lot of people think they know what they're talking about, but actually have no idea. So let's get into this. Let's get into pet food ingredients lists. And the first thing I want to cover is the order of the food that appears, because one piece of advice I hear and see a lot is, look at what comes first. It must be the meat. And I think, here we're talking about cats and dogs. We're not talking about other species right now. The meat must be first. They're carnivores. They're facultative carnivores. We must have the meat first on the ingredients list. That's how you judge a good food. Is that true?
No. Basically, it's not. So you do see a lot of packaging nowadays where they'll write meat as the first ingredient. And what they're trying to say is that it's more meat than anything else, which is not necessarily the case. Because if you've got something that is, for example, they've got chicken as the first ingredient. If it's just chicken, it's mostly water. About 70% of it is just water. So there's actually no protein behind it. So it doesn't mean it's a higher in protein diet, which is another thing that they try and promote. Usually, if you've got something that has meat probably as the second or third ingredient, it might be in the form of meat meal or meat byproduct meal, which is actually a lot higher in protein and way less water. So that's why it's lower down on the ingredient list, because it's not as heavy as chicken that contains all that water.
Yeah, and that's probably one thing we should say, isn't it, is that the order of the ingredients on the list are legally required, both in Europe and the EU, and obviously where you are in Australia, we're talking to each other from the other side of the world. Isn't technology amazing? The ingredient list has to go from biggest to smallest, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So a lot of companies will use fresh chicken in order to make that chicken initially, before it even goes into the food, weigh more than everything else. But like you say, that chicken is actually 70% water, and that's all well and good, but it doesn't actually impact on the nutrition of the diet at all. No. So not having meat as the top ingredient doesn't therefore correspond to poor quality or low protein, does it? Because that's what we're really after, is it? Is that the meat provides. So yeah, so meat being the first ingredient is not the be all and end all. And it'll often say something like fresh chicken as the first ingredient as well, which makes it sound even better, but it doesn't really matter. So when we talk about So if we see something that like says chicken meal or meat meal or something like that, that probably is coming a little bit further down, isn't it? So it's probably behind the carbohydrate. The carbs is often the first one. But what actually is meat meal and what does it mean?
So meat meal, again, defined by AFCO. So AFCO is, they're the feed control officials, and they set definitions on each ingredient. Their definition of meat meal is basically all the skeletal meat, the muscle meat. Basically, that's then dried out and ground down and rendered, and then that is put into the food. So when it is put on an ingredient list, it's actually referring to the meal itself, not the pre-product, if that makes sense, because it's going into the diet as a meal.
Yeah. So it's just pure protein, isn't it?
Exactly.
For our pets, that's a great source of nutrition, super easily digestible. They can extract what they need out of that without any problems, can't they?
Exactly, yeah, and that's the thing. Like you said, it's already ground down. It's already in a highly digestible form. Whereas chicken, in its sort of fresh form, there's low nutrition, and it's going to take a lot longer for them to digest. They're going to be expending energy to get a very small amount of energy back. They're going to be in a negative balance there. Whereas if they're having a meat meal, it's kind of pre-digested for them.
Oh, that is a really interesting point that I haven't heard of. And probably, I mean, obviously not that relevant to like our kibble-based diets where that fresh chicken is basically dehydrated and whacked in it. But maybe relevant to the raw and the fresh foods, that actually that fresh meat takes a lot, is a lot harder to, or, a lot more energy to really extract that nutrition. That's really interesting. That's a point I haven't really considered, actually. So what about when it says on ingredients lists, meat and animal derivatives? Because that does sound a bit weird, a bit sort of maybe not brilliant quality or nutrition, a bit vague. And I can understand why people find that a bit of a worrisome thing. But what does that actually mean?
So the meat and animal derivatives is actually, it's slightly a language difference. So with the meat and animal derivatives, that would, like you said, that would be more of a UK labeling. In Australia, our labeling usually says animal byproduct meal or byproduct or animal byproducts. Sometimes that's also labeled in the US. So our labeling kind of, it just goes by whoever is kind of selling the food, if that makes sense. But the animal byproduct meal or animal byproducts or derivatives, what that is basically it's just organ meats. So things that are byproducts or derived from an animal that humans don't eat. So stuff like liver, spleen, kidneys, lungs, heart, brain sometimes as well. It's not scary. It's not like nasty, like gross hooves or ears or something crazy. It's literally just organ meats. And it's very nutrient dense. It's very good. But of course, when you read it on a package and it says animal derivatives, it just sounds like, what are you putting in there? You're putting fur or you're putting a tail? Like, what does that mean? So,
yeah, I think that's great. So it's stuff derived from animals that isn't their muscle, basically.
Yes, exactly.
But not, because you'll see it, lots of people are like, well, there's hooves and feathers and all sorts of things. Like, well, no, that's not actually true. So because it's certainly true in the Europe, and I think I don't know what it's like in Australia, but I guess it's very similar, is that the food in pet food has to be human grade consumption. I mean, we're not talking about labeling or buzzwords today, but you see that a lot, don't you? Human grade and all of that, and it kind of implies that some stuff in other foods isn't human grade. But certainly in Europe and the UK, everything that goes into pet foods is passed as fit in an abattoir, and you could feed it to humans if you wish to. That we don't want to eat spleens and liver. Well,
no.
Some of us like them, but they are actually, brilliant, isn't it? And also quite sustainable. We're not wasted. Pet foods actually are brilliant for a way of not wasting anything that comes off of an animal who has been farmed for food.
Exactly, yeah, and that's the thing is that, like you said, humans don't really eat that stuff. I mean, some people do enjoy offal, but by and large, it would just be something you would throw out, and it's literally a byproduct of human manufacturing or human food. It's not that, like you said, one food is human grade and one is not. They're all coming from the same abattoir. It's just what we're using is different from what, you know, a pet food company is using.
Precisely. And then just to finish up on meat, because I think we could talk about this forever. Sometimes on the labeling it will say meat and animal derivatives, 4% beef or 4% chicken. And again, you know, when I started learning about this, I was like, 4%, that's nothing, that's awful. Why would you put that? But that's actually a minimum, isn't it?
Yeah. So usually you'll see, particularly the guaranteed analysis as well, it's not really an exact number. It's just sort of like, hey, when we put this formulation together, it needed a minimum amount of this much protein. So it's this much, we think. It could be more, it could be less, but that's pretty much what we think is in there. And based on our formulation and some feeding tests, this is what we expect it to contain. So like you said, just because it says 4% beef, it could be higher than that. It's just that's the bare minimum that it has to contain.
Yeah, I think in Europe again, that's the legal requirement for the minimum. So they have to put it in there. So it has to be at least 4% beef or 4% chicken. But that doesn't mean it's 4% protein. There's more in it, but they could be more beef or more chicken. Particularly if it says meat, it's not specifying a species, is it, or a kind of meat?
No.
But again, that's not, unless that pet has genuine food allergies to one particular kind of meat protein over another, it doesn't actually matter if there is a mixture of meats in there, does it?
No, not at all. Unless you, like you said, they are specifically trying to avoid something. The thing what we usually recommend, if they're going through a food elimination trial, so if we suspect that they have allergies, we would recommend something that is, you know, it is guaranteed that it is only this one type of meat. Basically, so you could rule out if they have any allergies. So you don't want something that's got a few different proteins in there. But if you know for a fact that you've gone through the elimination trial and you know chicken's a problem, then you would want something that labels that it says chicken or doesn't say chicken. But like you said, if it just says meat, it can contain a couple of different proteins in there. They don't necessarily have to specify beef or sheep or goat.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that, again, it's all to do with the protein that's in there, and meat and animal derivatives. What that basically allows the company to do is potentially vary the formulation from what goes in there in the first place, which means that they are less beholden. So they can, you know, if there's a glut of turkeys after Christmas, they're going to be cheaper at the market. They can put those in the food, and then the cost to the consumer is the same. You know, they're not having to, the premium diets that contain, you know, 100% beef or 100% chicken are more expensive because they can't do that. But at the end of the day, it doesn't actually matter to the animal what source their protein is, unless they have a genuine allergy, which actually is fairly rare. So, you know, don't be afraid when it just says meat and animal derivatives, 4% beef or 4% chicken. That's absolutely fine. And it is a minimum. You know, it's not, you know, look at the percentage of protein in there. It's not going to say 4% for a cat food or a dog food, is it?
Yeah, no, and that's the thing. There is requirements for those things. Like you said, a cat food is always going to contain at least 20 or 30% protein, because that's their minimum that they require. So like you said, it's not just going to be 4%, or it wouldn't be able to be marketable.
Precisely. And which brings, you know, us all the way around to the point of this chat, really, is that ingredients are nice, but they're not actually that important. What's important is nutrition. And
exactly.
a lot of the nutrition is good and high quality. That is the main thing. So let's move on from meat to the thing which is always either the second or the first on the list, which is the carbohydrates, which are generally cereal based, aren't they, for pets? And again, this causes a lot of angst, and a lot of people get really quite concerned because pets, our cats and our dogs are carnivorous. So they're like, well, why is the majority of their pet food carbohydrates? That can't be right. But it's fine, isn't it? How do you
totally fine.
your clients?
Yeah, so again, people sort of hear that there's no minimum requirement or there's no maximum requirement for carbohydrates in a diet. And basically what that means is just that we haven't really established the amount of carbohydrate that pets need. They still need carbohydrates as part of a balanced diet, just like we do. They need protein, fat, and carbohydrate. They just have varying amounts that they require. So what I tend to look at is what is that carbohydrate or what is that product actually trying to provide nutritionally for that pet. So certain carbohydrates are way higher in linoleic acid, or they're really good in essential fatty acids, or they might be providing a really good fiber source for that pet. Some diets that are very high in carbohydrate are usually very high in fiber. Which has a lot of benefits for gastrointestinal issues and pets that have chronic diarrhea or chronic GI issues in general. They're going to benefit from a higher fiber diet, which unfortunately is going to look like a higher carbohydrate diet.
Yeah, precisely. Carbohydrates they're not the enemy. They contain massive vitamins and minerals, and like you say, some of them even contain fats if they're grains. And then the fiber is so important, because I think that, carb free, and there's a lot of diets that really are very, very low in carbs and fiber, particularly the fresh or the raw. Yeah. And that's not actually always the best thing for gut health. We talk about the microbiome. That's this new buzzword that you might have heard of. And actually some of the insoluble fibers, so some of the fiber that your pet doesn't digest, is vital for the little guts and the little bugs in their guts to live on.
Yeah.
And that has a huge impact on their health. It always kind of slightly worries me when people go, oh, but my dog produces these teeny tiny little poos that are so great to pick up. And I'm like, that's wonderful for you scooping it up in a bag, but that act might not be that great for your pet or for their gut health. So carbs, our pets can thrive, can't they? Even our cats can absolutely thrive, and they can digest them as well. This is the other thing, isn't it? Is that people are like, well, they're not rabbits, they can't digest grasses and grains, but they can, can't
they? Absolutely can. So particularly there was a recent study that came out on dogs, and they found that dogs have actually, probably for the better half of 10,000 years, have always had the gene that allows them to digest carbs. And cats are the same. Cats definitely have that gene as well. And we have that gene as well. That's why we can digest starches and carbs. So the theory that, well, dogs and cats don't need carbs because they can't actually digest them and they're just pooping it out, it's not actually true, because they digest them just as well as we do.
Precisely. And it brings us back around again to nutrients, not ingredients. What exactly are they giving our pets in order to be able to live and to thrive? And there is a practical aspect. Kibble-based diets do need that carbohydrate to be able to bind them together, doesn't it? To put them into biscuits, to be able to feed. There is a convenience argument as well, but that is not to the detriment of our pets' health.
No,
not at all. And those complete and balanced diets that we feed them, that are the little boring, the biscuits are boring. I get it. I get why people look at that bowl and think, this can't be right.
Yeah.
But it means that we can give them a diet which is complete and balanced and contains everything they need and keeps them healthy and keeps them well. And we don't have to do anything. We just literally have to open the bag of the great quality food and feed our pets, and then get on with our lives. It's just one thing off the to-do list of life. So the carbohydrate debate will always rage, but the bottom line is our pets can thrive on them, get all the nutrition that they need, and they absolutely can digest them. And those carbohydrates aren't just important for your pet, they're also important for the guts, the bacteria in their guts, which is vital for their health.
That's right.
Right, so we've done carbs, we've done meat. That's the main two, but you mentioned fats. So what about fats? What should we be looking for on an ingredient list that talks about fats?
So you'll usually see, you may or may not, because they don't have to label it unless they've added a certain amount of fat in there. But you'll usually see some form of fat or fat-soluble vitamin. So something like a vitamin E, or vitamin E has to be supplemented into a diet because they can't really get any of that from a food. As for essential fatty acids, you'll often get those derived, like you said before, from a grain or from some other form of carb that's in the diet. The main issue that I do see in practice is people will feed a diet either that they've made at home or that they've had formulated, and they've completely forgotten to include a fat. It's still important to be in there, because then you tend to see issues where they have a fatty acid deficiency, which can be a cause of really bad dandruff or skin conditions, and you do see a flare-up of certain skin allergies as well, if they don't have enough of those essential fatty acids to build up the skin barrier and protect them against those sorts of allergens getting into the skin. So things like, you'll often see there's either an amount on there that says EFAs and like a total amount, or omega-3 and omega-6. So they're, like your fish oils or your soy oils, you'll see included in the ingredient list.
Yeah, so they're something that actually, if you see it, that maybe indicates that it is a good diet, because they have actually stuff, and then they are actually listing them. So once we're past the carbohydrate source, which can be a few different things, the meat source, which can be a few different things, the fats, then we get down to those other little bits and bobs, and that's really variable, I think, between different diets. And sometimes at that point on the list, you'll start to see some sort of quite long, chemically sounding words which aren't natural, and again might trigger some worry. But also in some diets, that's when you start seeing things that sound amazing: blueberries and goji berries and raspberries and kale and spinach, and you're like, oh my goodness, look at all this wonderful stuff. But actually, so we'll start with those first, all the things that sound wonderful, and you read the first, and then you get to the end, you're like, oh my God, this is amazing. Like, how much impact are they important? Is things like that important?
Yeah, look, they're mostly just in there to have, some sort of superfood claim on the packaging. We tend to call them fairy dust. There's really nothing that they're adding to the diet. They just sound really cool. Like you said, blueberries are a really common one, where they're like, oh, and we included blueberries and carrots and apples and this and that, and you're just like, okay, but it's right at the end, so it's literally like some little sprinkling of powder in there. There's really nothing else that it's adding to the diet. Sometimes they add a little bit of flavoring, but they're really not important nutritionally.
Yeah, because obviously, like we said at the beginning, you start with the biggest ingredient, but by the time you have run past like the first sort of maybe 4 or 5, you're really getting down to like really tiny percentages, aren't you? Like 1, 2 or less of the overall.
Little sprinkling. Yeah.
And then of course, obviously, then we have our vitamins and minerals and all that kind of thing, which are also there in very tiny amounts, but that's all our pets need of that kind of thing, isn't it?
Exactly, yeah, because I think the thing with vitamins and minerals is that majority of your vitamins and minerals, you're still going to get like quite a bit of it from the food itself. The additives at the bottom are really just to ensure that you have the correct amounts. So that's why you'll have a diet that says it's complete and balanced, which means, yeah, you've got all your food, and then you've got all your additional stuff that makes sure that you're reaching those minimums and maximums that are set by AFCO. So if, like I said before, again, vitamin E's a common one. You'll always see vitamin E pretty much, because they can really not get enough of vitamin E from their food. It's really hard to get that sort of thing. And then particularly with cat food, you'll always see taurine in there because they have to supplement taurine for cats.
Yeah, exactly. And then the other thing that is on some packaging is it says preservatives, and then sometimes also colorings. And again, in human food, we're told to avoid anything with colorings in, avoid anything with preservatives in, and yet here it is in our pet food. Are they something that we should be worried about?
It depends. It depends on a few things with colorings, because colorings are one of those things where it could be good or it could be not so good. So there's certain colorings that we would avoid. So there's colorings that are there's a red food coloring that we would avoid. That's an artificial coloring that can have some issues. You'll usually find that more so in sort of like store-bought treats. So we tend to say like, don't buy them. But the food and the colorings that are in kibble diets, they're usually derived from natural ingredients. Either sometimes you'll also see animal digest used as a coloring. Basically, they're just spraying the food with like a flavoring or a coloring just to make it look uniform. It's nothing scary. It's usually a natural color that they're using. And you will also see on those packagings, even if they say colorings and preservatives, they may still have a natural or 100% natural claim on the bag, because you can have natural preservatives and colors in a food that claims to be natural. So it's not a bad thing.
No, and I think that's certainly over here. There's a lot of e-numbers. E-numbers are the scary thing, aren't they? And I don't actually 100% know, but I think a lot of e-numbers have now been, maybe banned from foods. But certainly, if you read the back of the packet, they have to list the e-numbers. And actually, there's not a lot of pet foods that list e-numbers anymore. I think most of them are using natural colorings now, from, I don't know, beetroot to make it red or whatever. There's most of them are naturals. And interestingly, the preservatives as well, they're using a lot of, is it vitamin E and vitamin C as preservatives, is that right?
Yeah. So preservatives, are usually some sort of fat or fatty vitamin or fatty acid. Basically, all it's doing is just preventing oxidization. So anytime it's exposed to air, it's not going to instantly go off. So preservatives are not a bad thing. They basically just stop your food from going off.
Yeah, exactly. And again, it's that balance of the convenience of kibbles and diets like that. You can eat raw and fresh if you want to, but obviously they are convenient, but they're not bad. And the preservatives that we're using are natural. They're not, they're not harmful in any way. And they mean that convenience is there both for us and for our pets.
Exactly.
I think we've run through the whole thing. So let's just really, really fast at the end. What is it on the back of a packet that we should look at to try to, I know this is, we could talk for another hour, but if someone is looking at the back of the packet and trying to judge the food, which should they look at? What's your advice on that?
Yeah, look, I usually there's so many things that you could, like I said, you could talk for hours on what things to look at and what not to look at. But usually, in my opinion, I would just ignore the ingredient list. It's only important, like you said before, if there's something specific that you need to avoid because they're allergic or that it doesn't agree with them, certain types of ingredients. But the ingredient list, just ignore it. The guaranteed analysis is helpful. It's not perfect. It just gives you a guide on certain key nutritional factors. So if you know that your pet needs a certain amount of protein because of whatever condition that they're going through, you can check the crude protein amount and be like, oh, okay, so it's probably got around 30%. That's great. Again, it could be higher. It's kind of one of those things where it's just a legal thing that they put on there. The main thing that I tell everyone to look for is, what does it say as the AFCO statement? So the AFCO statement is where it says, hey, this diet has been tested or formulated to suit whatever life stage for this pet. So if you've got an adult dog, then you want something that says this is formulated for an adult dog at maintenance. So you know that food is going to meet their requirements. You don't want something that says that it's for all life stages. That's just my opinion. Don't attack me for it. But it's just because it's non-specific. You want something that's specifically made for your pet and your pet's needs.
Fabulous. Fabulous. And I think, Jess, we will leave it there for today. I am so grateful for you giving us all your time. I really, really appreciate it. It is so fascinating to talk to you, and you make it so easy to understand as well. I think that's the brilliant thing. So everybody, thank you so much for watching. Please go and follow Jess on all of her channels. She is amazing, and she also answers questions as well. So if you've got anything specific and she's in a good mood, she probably will answer and let you know. You can get a free nutritional consultation from the other side of the world if you are where I am. So Jess, thank you ever so much. I really hope we'll get to do this again. If anybody watching has got any questions or any subjects that you'd maybe like us to cover, please comment and let us know. And yeah, we'll see you again soon. Bye.